Hi everyone, thanks for checking out this video. This is going to be another one of these like advice videos I've been making. And the reason I'm covering this topic in particular is that I've gotten a couple different emails from like a couple different people all asking the same question. And the question I've been getting asked is like how to apply to PhD programs in the US. And I've gotten several of these emails, and it's to the point now where I think that like my viewers are interested in hearing about this topic. So I figured I would make a video with some tips about this. So there's just going to be a video with some tips and advice about how to apply to PhD programs in the U.S. And this is mostly meant for people in other countries, but if any Americans are watching this, I think that some of the information in this video could also be useful to Americans applying for PhD programs. Okay, so yeah, just a couple points of advice I'm going to go through here. So the first point I wanted to cover is that PhD programs are very different from undergrad, and also very different from other kinds of grad school, like law school and medical school. So with like undergrad and law school and medical school, those things are kind of what we think of as more of like being a traditional student. Like you go to class, you take midterms, you take final exams, you do homework, things like that. PhD programs are different from that. A PhD program is more research focused. So you might still have a couple classes in like your first year of it, but the main like bulk of the program is going to be working on research. Yeah, like working on different research projects, possibly working in a lab if you're going for like a science PhD. And you actually work for a professor. So you have this professor who's like your advisor, basically. They advise you on your PhD, and you're basically like an employee of this professor. Usually they'll be paying you actually. Yeah, with PhD programs, usually there's no tuition, and you actually get paid to do it. So in some ways, it feels less like being a traditional student and more like being like an entry-level like research employee of a university. So what that means for the application process is that what they're looking for with their applicants to the program, it's kind of different from like undergrad and from other kinds of grad school. So they're not really looking for people who can like sit in classrooms and like pass exams and stuff like that. The main thing they're looking for with the application process is people who can successfully work on research like for the university. So basically, when you're applying for a PhD program, the goal, like your goal as an applicant should be to prove to the university that you can successfully like work on and complete research projects as like almost like an employee of the university. So yeah, it's kind of like a whole different application criteria compared to like the undergrad. So the second point that I have here is that you actually don't need a master's degree to apply for a PhD program. Yeah, this is something I didn't know at first, and I didn't find out until someone like corrected me on it. So after I had finished with my undergrad, I had thought that I would like never go to a PhD program because I just thought like I don't want to like have to do a master's degree first, and that'll be like 2 years or something, and then like 5 or 6 years for a PhD. But yeah, eventually someone just corrected me on this, and I found out you actually don't need a master's degree to enroll in a PhD program. It can help if you have one, and we'll talk a bit more about this in a second. But it's like I said, they're looking for people who can successfully work on research. So if you have a master's degree, and especially if it was like a thesis, like research master's degree, that could for sure help. But if you don't have a master's degree, you can still apply and enroll in a PhD program, but it may be more difficult to get accepted to one unless you have some other kind of research experience, which I'll talk about that in a second. But in my case, I didn't have a master's degree, but I did have about a year of experience working as a computer programmer in a research lab. So I was able to use that kind of research experience kind of instead of a master's degree to prove that I could successfully work on research. Okay, so the next point I have here is the actual application process. So what I'm going to say here, I only really know like for sure at my own university and the other ones that I applied to. I applied to like probably 7 or 8 different programs. So I don't know how it works at like every single department of every university in the US. But the ones I applied to, these like 7 or 8 programs or whatever, it was kind of the same deal at all of them. So I think that this is like a pretty common way of doing things. So there was really two steps to the application process. So the first step is kind of similar to undergrad. And so for this part, I'm actually going to show you on the computer what my university requires in terms of this first step. Yeah, so just to give you guys an example, this is actually like the admissions page for my department at my university. This says all the requirements that you have to include in an application for, I think in this case, it's actually all of the graduate programs in my department, including the PhD program. So this part of the application process is like pretty standard and kind of similar to like undergrad and other kinds of grad school. So it's like, yeah, GPA, but again, like you don't need like an amazing GPA. My GPA in undergrad was actually like a 3.06, I think. Actually, funny story behind that. Yeah, I was taking Arabic as my foreign language because I was like so determined to like learn how to speak Arabic, and in all my Arabic classes, I kept getting like C's and stuff just because I was like so bad at it and it was so hard that it like was pretty bad on my GPA. But yeah, my GPA ended up being like pretty close to like a 3.0. So and I was still able to get into the program. So I don't think you have to have like an amazing GPA or anything. Same with the GRE. Like actually, it says now, like due to COVID, my university and a lot of other universities are actually not even requiring the GRE. So if you're good at standardized tests, this might be like a bad thing. Like in my case, my GRE scores actually were pretty good, so I think it actually helped with my application. But if this is one of your weak points, then this may be beneficial that a lot of universities are currently not requiring it. But either way, I think even before COVID, it's like, yeah, the GPA and the GRE scores, they matter a little bit, but they're not the most important thing. And yeah, if you're coming from like a non-English speaking country, you have to like take this English test. For me, obviously, that wasn't the case with my application. But yeah, with these PhD programs, they're very international in terms of like terms of like where the students are coming from. So if you're a little bit weak on English, like don't get discouraged from applying because a lot of people in the program are going to be not native English speakers. So if this is kind of your weak point, I would just say like don't let that discourage you because you're not going to be the only one in the program who's still learning English. So don't get too discouraged about that. So yeah, I would say like yeah, what all of these things so far have been not the most important thing. This I think actually is possibly the most important thing, the letters of recommendation. So I wrote this on the board too. It's like an entire whole point by itself. But yeah, the letters of recommendation, the goal with these, if you can, is to get letters of recommendation that will demonstrate your research experience if you have it. So if you have any research experience like working in a lab or working as an assistant for a professor or something, or like an internship or like professional work, whoever you can get to write a letter of recommendation to talk about research that you've worked on, that will be like super beneficial for the PhD admissions. And for me, I think this was one of the strong points of my application when I was applying, because I was able to get 3 letters of recommendation from 3 different professors who I worked on research for. So one of them was actually from an economist who I worked for during the senior year of my undergrad. I was actually working for an economist as a research assistant, like writing Python code for him and analyzing data and things like that. And then after undergrad, I actually worked for 2 different scientists. One of them was like a paid job, and one of them was like an unpaid volunteer position. I worked for 2 different like biologists doing similar work, computer programming and stuff like that. And from all 3 of these people, I was able to get letters of recommendation talking about like my research experience and what I was able to contribute to their research and how I could have the potential to succeed in a PhD program. So I think that was super helpful. So yeah, if you have any research experience, I would suggest getting a letter of recommendation from whoever supervised you in that role. And if you don't have research experience, I would suggest getting some of it if you can. And I would say even if it means taking an unpaid volunteer position, I think that can still be beneficial, even if it's only like a couple hours a week of like unpaid like volunteer work at a lab or something. It'll help quite a lot when it comes to getting admitted into a PhD program. If you can just get a letter from some scientist talking about like work you did contributing to the research in the lab, I think that'll be like super helpful. So I would say, yeah, like these other things are like not really the most important part of the application. The letters of recommendation, if you can demonstrate your research experience with those letters of recommendation, then this actually might be like the most important part of the application, I think. And yeah, the other thing is just like the resume and personal statement. Personal statement is also pretty important. You want to like write about your experience and like your goals for your career. And again, this is just kind of like talking about like your long-term goals, why you're interested in whatever field you're trying to go into, things like that. They want to like see who you are as a person. So this is also like pretty important. And then the resume, yeah, of course you want to have like a nice resume that sort of presents the whole picture of all of your experience. Yes, that's also pretty important. But yeah, so this is just an example from my university, but I'd say like these requirements are pretty standard for like the first step in the admissions process. But yeah, these are like pretty standard, I think, for most different universities. And then, so basically, after you've made it through this first step and you've sort of made it past the first like hurdle here, if you make it through the first step without them like rejecting your application, then the second step, which is actually, I think, a bit more difficult, but the second step is actually to find an advisor. And so usually, at least with the places I apply to, the way it works is if you pass through the first step, then they say like, okay, you've met like the minimum requirements to potentially enroll in the program. But in order to actually enroll, you have to find a professor to take you on as their student. And this will be your advisor for the PhD. So it's like I said, it's kind of like being an employee of this professor. You basically work in their lab as a research assistant, and sometimes also be like a teacher's assistant, help them with the teaching, help them with grading, things like that. And in exchange for working for them, you actually get paid, which is pretty cool because it's not like other kinds of school where you pay tuition and they're getting your money. With a PhD program, most of the time you'll actually be getting paid. But in some ways, this makes the enrollment process a little bit trickier because, like, when you're enrolling for undergrad, it's like the college like wants to get you and wants to like get your money. But for a PhD program, you need to actually find someone to hire you, like, to work for them. You know what I mean? So you have to find one of these professors who's actually willing to take you on as a student and actually like pay you to work on research. So it's a good opportunity if you can get a position, but you do have to find someone who's willing to like take you on basically as an employee and actually like pay you out of their own funding and stuff. So yeah, but the second step is that it's kind of like you make it through the first step and you've met the minimum requirements, and the second step will typically say like, okay, you can enroll in the program if you're able to find a professor to take you on as a student. And this is the part where I think the best way to do this is by cold emailing a bunch of professors. So in a lot of these like advice videos, I always tell you guys the same thing. It's like the best way to find these positions is to just send out a bunch of cold emails. It's kind of a numbers game. It's about like emailing like a lot of people, because if you email like 50 professors asking for like asking if they need a PhD student to work in their lab, probably at least a couple of them actually will need a PhD student, and then you'll be able to land a position. So I think this is like a numbers game of like reaching out to a lot of professors and just sending out a lot of cold emails and just telling them what you can contribute to their research, like making the case for yourself, kind of letting them know like what kind of skills you have and what you can contribute to their lab. It's kind of a matter of like cold emailing, just trying to like find a professor who's looking for PhD students and then trying to like convince them to take you on as their student. I'll say also there's kind of two different ways to go about this whole application process. So one way, and the way that I did it, was to like choose which universities I was going to apply to and then apply to those, and then look for professors like after I made it through the first step at some of those universities. Another way to go about this is, instead of looking for universities to apply to, you can actually look for specific professors who are working on the topic that you're interested in working on. And then even before you start the application process, you can email those professors and like ask in advance if they need any students. Because then if you're able to do that, if you're able to like, even beforehand, before even applying, if you can establish like a relationship with these professors, then they can kind of help you through the application process and kind of get you through it, and then take you on as a student. So yeah, it's kind of two different ways of going about it. So like, you can either choose which universities to apply to first, or you can specifically look for professors working on your topic of interest, and then apply to those professors' universities. But yeah, that's some advice on how to find an advisor. Again, it's just don't be shy about sending out cold emails and just letting professors know when you're interested in their research, and sort of like talking about what you can contribute to them in terms of your skills. Yeah, don't be shy about that. One piece of advice I have is just, yeah, like I said here, like consider non-famous universities. What I mean by this is that I think people like kind of think that the university rankings are more important than they actually are. I found that in like the job market and stuff, I'm in the final year of my program now and starting to like look at jobs, and I'm finding that in the job market, people like when they're hiring for jobs, they don't seem to care that much about like what rank a university was, or like how famous it is or how prestigious it is. What they really care about when it comes down to it is your research and publication record. And yeah, that's really the most important thing that's going to matter when you like start to enter the workforce. People like, yeah, I think the rankings don't matter as much as people think they do. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of like non-famous universities that still have like very, very strong research programs that I would consider applying to. And actually, I've started to like appreciate this more too, as I've been like as I've read and like learned more about the history of like computing and like the tech industry in the U.S. I actually like reading these kinds of books in my free time, like books about like the history of like the computer industry. And when you read these books, it's like when you read about the people who like founded all these companies and were like the pioneers of this kind of like innovation in like computer science and the internet and these like tech companies and stuff. A lot of these people did come from like famous universities like Harvard and MIT, but a lot of them also came from like places that are kind of in the middle of nowhere that a lot of people probably haven't heard of. Like when I read these books, yeah, like a lot of these people are from like University of like Illinois, University of Wisconsin, kind of these like Midwestern universities that are kind of in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by like farmland and stuff. So these places also have like very, very strong research programs, and even though they're not like as highly ranked as like MIT or Harvard or something, I would recommend checking them out, because yeah, like a lot of these kind of middle of nowhere state schools actually have like very, very strong research programs. And it's like I said too, it's with a PhD program, it's kind of what you make of it. It's more about the person than the actual university or the university ranking. It's kind of more about you and like what you do with your research, and like how hard you work on your project, and just what you do in terms of your publications and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say, just for this last point of advice, just like try to cast like a wide net and consider like the less prestigious or whatever, less like highly ranked, possibly non-famous universities, because a lot of those too, including like state schools in like Iowa and like Illinois and stuff, they still have like very, very strong research programs that could be definitely worth checking out. But yeah, those are just a couple tips for you guys. Just because I've been getting this question a lot of like tips for applying to like U.S. PhD programs. So that's just some advice I have. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comments, and I'll try to answer them. Also, feel free to email me. Email me with questions you have too. If you have like a longer question, I like hearing from you guys. I like trying to like give advice to people who want advice. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next time.